Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, the Investigatory Powers Bill is due to be presented to Parliament on Wednesday. The new bill is the latest in a series of attempts to update the law to allow police and security services to access communications data. It replaces the Communications Data Bill, dubbed the Snoopers Charter by its critics, that failed to make it through Parliament in the last session because of opposition from the Liberal Democrats. With more and more communication taking place online and through social media rather than on the phone, the government says new powers are needed to allow spies to access information about our online activities. Police sources expect the new bill to require communications companies to retain data on the websites people have visited for a year. But the government says they will not be granting powers to go through people's full web browsing history. It's also been rumoured that under the new legislation, spies will be able to hack into smartphones and computers, giving them access to all the information they contain. Critics of the bill are worried that the government will decide against giving the judiciary the power to authorise access to this kind of data, and that it will be instead ministers who have the final say. Conservative MP David Davis has warned that he doesn't think the bill will get through Parliament unless judicial authorisation is included. But Home Secretary Theresa May says that many of the more contentious powers from the 2012 bill have been removed and that there will be world-leading oversight of warrants to access digital records.
We've looked very carefully at those arguments. We've listened to people. I've met communication service providers, I've met civil liberties groups, and crucially, I've also met the charities and groups, organisations representing victims who know what it's like when people suffer from child sexual abuse, child sexual exploitation and rape, for example. So I'm very clear at the need for these powers, but I will be setting out to Parliament...
But for proper regulation as well,
with
oversight.
proper regulation, proper oversight. And I think what the bill will do on Wednesday is it sets a modern legal framework, but crucially, it has very strong oversight arrangements within it. I think it will be world-leading oversight arrangements within the bill, and it will be clearer and more comprehensive and comprehensible than the previous legislation has been.
Theresa May there. Keir Starmer, you want judicial oversight of these powers, but as Theresa May pointed out yesterday on the Andrew Marr programme, 3 independent reviews of these powers came up with 3 different recommendations on this. So why do you think that judicial authorisation is critical?
I think when we're talking about intercepting communications, what we're actually saying to each other rather than pure data, that is at core a real privacy issue. And privacy is too important to us to be left to a politician. The test is whether the right individual is being targeted, whether it's necessary and it's proportionate. These are tests that judges are very familiar with. They're totally independent, and many of them are trained for this purpose. So I think when you're talking about the most intrusive surveillance that goes into our conversations at the heart of
because this is the content we're looking at.
That ought to be a judicial. Now, this is important because this is a once-in-a-lifetime chance to get it right. We do need a new law. Law enforcement, the security services need powers to carry out their duties properly and their functions properly. We need the right safeguards, get the balance right, and we can agree historically here. This is a really important chance that I hope we're not going to blow.
Right. Suella, do you agree with Keir Starmer that it has to be judicial authorisation?
No,
Why
I
not?
don't. Well, I think the bill addresses 3 key problems. There's a lack of coherence currently in the framework and in the rules. This consolidates all the codes of practice and makes it clearer. Secondly, it's incomprehensible currently, and so again, this bill will be transparent and robust. But lastly, and most importantly, there is an unprecedented threat to our national security. The head of MI5 said it's the most serious that he's ever seen in his 30-year career. The powers that our security and intelligence services need enables them to keep ahead of the enemy, frankly.
Sure, but we're talking about who's going to give the authorisation. Yep. You agree on that level. The critical part here is, should it be a judge or should it be the Home Secretary?
Yep. I'm very clear on this. I think it should be the Home Secretary, and the bill strikes the right balance with an element of judicial involvement. And I tell you why. I mean, like Keir, I was a barrister, and so I have utmost respect for the rule of law and the judicial process. However, I think on an issue like this, it's right that elected and accountable people have this decision-making power. When
but
people
she's not
speak to me,
independent, is she, in that sense? I mean, the point that Keir Starmer is making is it should be someone that's independent of party politics.
I think accountability and parliamentary scrutiny is more important, actually. Judges, as expert as they are appointed, they're unelected and unaccountable as a result. And I think it's vital that we have that electable element in
What
this
about that issue of
decision-making process.
accountability?
There's a misconception here, and that is that the Home Secretary or any other minister is going to come to Parliament and account on an individual warrant-by-warrant basis. It simply doesn't happen. It's not going to happen.
It has been happening, though, hasn't it? I mean, she has been looking at individual cases. She does sign off.
She has.
Yes.
And she's got there are something like 2,500 warrants a year, and each of them takes a significant amount of time. So this is a lot of the time that the Home Secretary has to set aside to do this. In truth, her team prepared them for her. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's what happens in reality. But to go back to the accountability point, of course, she carries out that function. I'm not criticising that. The point is whether this Home Secretary or any Home Secretary, in truth, is accountable in Parliament for the individual decisions they make on individual warrants, because they don't discuss the detail. What we've got is a system where, after the event, others look at warrants and assess whether they were rightly granted or not. That's a good system. But to have a judge which is a better safeguard for the future doesn't rule out having that after the event oversight as well. So the idea that somehow there's this different level of accountability is to misunderstand how the system actually works at the moment.
I mean, taking a couple of your points there, I mean, is your problem the amount of time that the Home Secretary has to devote to it, or that you don't trust her or her team's judgment?
It's not that I don't trust her or previous Home Secretaries. It's that this should be a function for an independent judge when it's this high level of intrusion into privacy. We're looking at a new law, we're looking at a new settlement. We need robust safeguards. Other countries do it in this way, and it is perfectly workable, and it's a better system.
Right. I mean, it's a better system, says Keir Starmer. So does David Davis, who is one of your colleagues in Parliament, and he's not alone. There are other Conservative MPs who want that judicial authorisation because he says if it's not included, you won't get the bill through.
Frankly, I think this does come down to the original point I made that, you know, when I meet my constituents and they say to me, what are you doing about, you know, this terror threat? I don't feel safe. I want to be able to say, and Parliament's sovereignty should allow us to be able to say that we are doing something, not judges behind closed doors, frankly. And I think that it's right that this power does allow that. There is an Investigatory Powers Commission, which is a panel of senior judges, which will have some element of involvement. So I think it strikes a balance. This is what was, it's in line with the 3 independent reports. It departs from Anderson, yes, but the Intelligence and Security Committee suggested the power should be
Wouldn't
executive.
it be a two-tier system then? Wouldn't you have a system that isn't actually comprehensive and fully transparent? The very things you were criticising at the beginning about the current situation, that you would have judges involved in some of the decisions. I mean, even the Home Secretary herself says she has to devote a certain amount of time every single day to this. She's distracted by other issues too. Wouldn't it be better to have judges take that role?
No, because of the lack of accountability. They are appointed and they are not directly, legitimately connected to parliamentary sovereignty.
In what circumstances can you see the Home Secretary answering questions in Parliament on individual warrants that she may or may not have authorised? I can't think of any.
Well, as you said, Joe, there are situations where the Home Secretary has been transparent.
Where? Can you give us some of those examples where we would then expect to hear her actually open up about the decision she's made?
In an individual case.
The point is that these applications are going to be made through the right processes. They're going to be, a decision will be within her remit. And there is a commission, a body of senior judges, which has some oversight. And I think that strikes the right balance. It doesn't give this power exclusively to judges, and there is an element. Privacy is a right of individuals, but it is qualified by the interests of national security. And I think it's right that the elected officials and the government and the executive power has a large say in the decision.
Do you think it won't get through Parliament if there isn't full judicial authorisation on this?
I think robust safeguards are really important, and without them it won't get through. And it's not just a question of whether, in a sense, there's more votes on this side or the other. If we're going to get this right, this will be a framework for the future. Getting it right and getting people agreed on it is a prize worth having, because we can all then move forward with consensus. And I think that's in this really important area, for all the reasons that we've been given, to get consensus about the approach is really worth having.
Right. Well, there isn't consensus at the moment.
There
Let's
isn't.
see what's actually included in the bill when it's presented to Parliament. With us now, Joe Twyman from the pollsters YouGov, our very own 007 in this particular case. But polls generally show that the public backs surveillance powers, don't they?
It depends on what you're asking about. If you're asking about anti-terrorist powers, so if you're asking should the security services, should the police have powers to track terrorists and stop them doing naughty things, then yes, a majority, although it's only a small majority, do approve of that, whereas around about a third of people say that they oppose. If you ask about the general principle, however, you find that around about 4 in 10 people oppose and around about 3 in 10 people support it. And so the situation varies depending on what you're asking about. And if you're asking about local councils being able to check on recycling and things like that, then the support falls away.
Right. OK, so we're talking about, let's say for argument's sake, about the sort of serious issues. Has that changed or shifted in the wake of the Snowden revelations?
No, it doesn't appear to have done. That general mood seems to be maintained, because it's to do with people's fear of terrorist atrocity, and so they fear for their security and are willing to make certain sacrifices in terms of the country's privacy in order to maintain that.
What about levels of people's understanding in terms of new powers that could grant authorities to look at not just how many calls you've made or which sites you've actually logged on to, but the content of some of that communication?
People really don't understand the nuances of these things. They have broad ideas about, as your video piece showed, whether it's privacy or security.
Because that's binary, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. They don't have a good idea about that. What they do have is an idea about who they trust with these things. And they trust the security services. They trust MI6 the most. They get 2/3 of people trusting them. The police only about half, and politicians even fewer.
Right. So this argument that actually the Home Secretary could continue to be the person who has some sort of authorisation on warrants being issued would be less popular than, for instance, a judge. Is that right?
The data, we don't have data on that, but
No.
in a sense it would be correct, yeah. But at the same time, people do like politicians being a safeguard there as well. So it's an incredibly complicated situation and perhaps not entirely coherent.
What about government being in tune with public opinion on this issue? I mean, do you think there is an argument now for the government crossing the line in terms of public opinion?
Well, it's by no means overwhelming. As I say, it's around about 50%, 53% of people saying they support it. That is in no way substantial. But if you look at Conservative supporters, for instance, it rises to nearly 3/4. So maybe the Conservative Party is looking at its base and thinking that that's where its support comes from.
But what about then public support for individual types of interception, phone hacking, for example?
Well, again, people don't really have an idea of what that means. When you talk about phone hacking, you're talking about voice phone or you're talking about smartphone interceptions. It gets really, really complicated. And so generally speaking, when you say, what about paedophiles? What about terrorists? Should they be monitored? People say yes. And when they say, well, what about you? People say no.
I mean, Keir Starmer, Jeremy Corbyn has previously spoken out, as you know, against these sorts of powers or a further extension of powers to intrude into people's lives. He's not going to support this bill either way, is he?
Well, the position of arguing that a new law is needed with strong safeguards is the Labour Party position. Jeremy, I think, was taking a position on previous acts of Parliament, but I think, it chimes very much, I think, with the findings, which is, I think most people rightly think that surveillance should be targeted at those that need to be identified, etc. But it shouldn't be general and shouldn't apply to the public in general and them in particular.
Right, but of course the argument that's raised is that there will be fishing expeditions, that people will be able to browse into areas that aren't necessarily a threat to our national security. What will you do if Jeremy Corbyn says Labour's going to oppose this bill?
Well, the Labour Party will decide the approach of the Labour Party. We're conversations with Jeremy about this. The position I've set out today that's very clearly in favour of a new law with safeguards.
And we know your position. What's Jeremy Corbyn said to you in those conversations?
Well, we've had discussions with Jeremy. There's no... I mean, I think probably the discussions this weekend have been going on behind the scenes in the Tory party rather than the Labour Party. We're very clear on our position, which is, let's support powers where they're needed, but have proper safeguards. Now, that's not been controversial for us. I think actually behind the scenes, as I say, probably there's been more difficulty on the other side.